because you have no experience. By the way, the reason why you have no experience, even if you've been in a relationship before, and the reason why you have no frame of reference for relationships with what you think you need to accept in a relationship, is because you've always just presented yourself as this status homunculus. You've never really been in a true intimacy in a relationship because you're always, trying to be somebody who you're not. Hey guys, welcome back. Today let's talk about love and hate. There's a lot of confusion about the relationship between these two emotions, whether they're the same or different. I think people see their relationship as some kind of paradox because on the surface they should be different, but we feel them often in the same context. Kind of like that Courtney Love song about Kurt Cobain. The lyric goes, "I love him so much that it turns to hate." Don't blame me, that song came out when I was 12, so I have no choice but to like it. Anyway, these concepts need to be cleared up. We cannot rely on the epistemology of some bipolar girl anthem from the 90s to guide you through the muddy waters of your emotion. You need clarity. You need emotional clarity. Yeah, that's what Courtney Love says, but what Hugo says is concision in style, precision in thought, decision in life. You need clarity around your emotions so you can have clarity in your life, clarity in your action. And clarity in your psyche can only happen when you have a conception of what the field is, when you have a conception of what psychology is. An explanation, a delineation of seemingly disparate psychological phenomenon under the same conceptual framework, which is basically everything Jung said, plus specifically how emotions work. So first we'll discuss love and hate in a psychological context, how they can often feel the same in psychology. Then we'll discuss love and hate in a philosophical context, and then we'll work through an example of how to work through such a paradox when it arises, when you feel love and hate at the same time. Great. So, how can love and hate be the same in psychology? Well, it's due to something that you probably heard of called projection. Projection is when you take unconscious content, what you disavow about yourself, and you place it on somebody else. The hole in your boundary, well, the aperture for this projection, you could say, is a hole in your boundary. It's a weak boundary, and the hole is actually the cause of the unconscious content, which is important. We'll come back to that. And projection is just the classic, you think you're talking about reality, but really you're talking about your own emotions, your own unconscious emotions. And I guess as an aside, in my view, projection is the main defense mechanism. All the other ones are either variations or manifestations of the projection process or happenings, I guess. And the connotation of projection is that it's negative. You take this negative part about you take what you hate about yourself and you project it onto somebody else. You say, I really hate that person out there. And that's usually the assumption. That's the connotation with projection. But, it'll be important for our purposes here because, we're talking about love and hate. Projection can also be the projection of a positive unconscious content. Maybe you take positive attributes that you have, but you deny, or attributes that you wish you had, or you take positive attributes that you kind of have, but you don't really think you're able to cultivate on your own, and you project them onto somebody else. So let's go through an example of how this would work, how love and hate may tend to blend together. And where they often tend to blend together, like in the Courtney Love, Kurt Cobain situation, is in a relationship. That's when they usually blend together. So what happens is, let's say you meet a girl and she's pretty. So you think status. Pretty is status. Attractive is status, which triggers your status insecurity. So what do? You pretend. You present a certain aspect of yourself, kind of like a status homunculus. You exaggerate the cool parts, minimize the uncool spaz parts, or you learn game, right? You pretend to have a different personality. You pretend to have the personality of somebody who has a higher status, than the status you are, at least the status you perceive yourself to be. And that's really the sad part about game often, is you're pretending to be someone who's actually lower status than what you are. right? The classic example of you're trying to be cool, the girl who you're with, she just wants you to be authentic. And, that happens at best. I mean, you may simply outright lie about stuff if you meet a pretty girl. So that's the positive projection, right? She becomes the important one, right? As you hide and prevaricate, your doubt about your status grows and grows. You become less important, and she becomes even more important. That's the love. And so now you have a hole in your boundary. Not to mention, you have a hole in your boundary around status. So now you're going to be more sensitive to it. Whenever it comes up, you catch wind of her ex-boyfriend, and you want to learn as much about him as you can. Like how do you measure up? And you may begin to think that, and you may begin to feel jealous. And then if you don't understand where that comes from, you think that jealousy is the problem. It's not the problem. It's just it's the neurosis, in fact, trying to fix itself. It's just a symptom of something deeper going on. So the negative projection can come when that low status content that you are, repressing, it goes unexpressed, it accumulates. Now she does something that indicates low status, which she will eventually. Everybody does something, kind of trashy. And now you take all that low status, unconscious, and project it onto her. Oh, she's the bad one. She's the low status one. And that's the hate. And this goes especially poorly when you have no frame of reference for a relationship. You're comparing your girlfriend's behavior to some trad account that you follow on social media. Because you have no experience. By the way, the reason why you have no experience, even if you've been in a relationship before, and the reason why you have no frame of reference for relationships with what you think you need to accept in a relationship, is because you've always just presented yourself as this status homunculus. You've never really been in a true intimacy in a relationship because you're always, trying to be somebody who you're not. So you fluctuate between love and hate easily because the feeling, it's not based on you and your values and how you're managing your emotions. It's based on her behavior. And then, you take your baggage and dump it onto her behavior or her beauty. You make her more important than she is, and you make her less important than she is. Then, of course, you hide this inner turmoil, which throws fuel on the fire. And then the final stage of projection is calling her a bitch, but who's being the bitch? Am I right? Well, it's okay to be a bitch, just not a little bitch or a little bitch boy. Will not explain. So that's the natural undulation of all relationships. The crest is the love, the trough is the hate. And the fluctuation is the blurring of those lines. And all relationships go through this. They all have these crests and troughs. But you can judge the health of a relationship by really if we're going to take this wave analogy, by how high the amplitude is and the frequency, maybe. But the frequency just means more energy. So maybe if you're younger, there's going to be more higher frequency. If you're older, there's going to be lower frequency. So yeah, that's what you... And I guess the x-axis, the horizontal axis, would be the standards. It doesn't have to be high necessarily, but it needs to be clear, right? So the ideal relationship would be low amplitude, either high or low frequency, depending on, how much energy is in the relationship, how old you are, basically, how long you've been in the relationship. And what that looks like is, a playful teasing. That would be a healthy relationship, as opposed to, letting stuff build up and then projecting it. So that's one reason why people will say that love and hate are the same in a psychological context where there's neurosis, where you cannot tell the difference between your unconscious and reality. Then they will feel the same. They feel the same. And feelings are the metaphysics of psychology. However, philosophically, love and hate are definitely not the same. Love is an emotional response to a value, to a positive value that really matters to you, something that is important for your survival, physical, spiritual, or otherwise. And hate is an emotional response to, the exact opposite, a negative value, something that you think is poison, toxic to your survival. Now, in a philosophical context, love and hate may occur concurrently, where you shuttle back and forth between the two. I mean, just think of a situation where somebody else hurts someone who you love. You're going to hate that person who hurts the person who you love. And, the fact that this person who you love is hurt, it reminds you of how much you do love them. And so there's going to be a lot of hate and love in that situation. And if you don't have a very clear thinking, you may think that love and hate are the same, but really you're just, shuttling back and forth between the two. That's just your poor analysis. They're totally different, right? That's not projection. The interesting point here, though, of course, is that thing that you love. Do you really love it? That thing that is hurting the thing that you love. Do you really hate it? Now we're back at psychology, right? Is the person who you love, are they really out there or are they in here? Same thing with the person that you hate. So we're back at psychology. We're back at differentiating our emotions and seeing how they may play into our projections and our view of reality. And now we're back at psychology, which, as far as this channel is concerned, is the root of the issue. These two fields, psychology and philosophy. Oh, this one. There's no conflict between them. But there is a difference. Between them. And when you don't know the difference, when you're philosophizing, when in fact you're psychologizing, you get some really bad ideas. You get, see the classics from the Middle Ages, read Hegel, read Madness and Modernism by Sass. I did a video on that. I'll post a link in the description. I totally remember to do that. So you get all this bad philosophy when you're really psychologizing. And you also get really bad therapy too. You get therapy that takes this insecurity that you have and either indulge it, deny it, or project it. There's really no clear way to integrate it. So how do you do that? Well, let's go through that here. So let's get specific about, and we'll just take this guy from the example. So let's get specific about how this guy could work through this issue. This guy who's hiding his insecurity. And let's just take it through the process. Get some coffee. So what's something, if you meet a girl that you think is low status about yourself, that you would want to hide? A typical example is you don't really know what you want to do. You don't really know what you want to do in life. You're in college you're pre-law. You don't really know if you want to be a lawyer. You just like telling people that you're pre-law, it keeps them off your back, right? But you're not sure that's what you really want, and you don't really have a direction, and so you're insecure about that. That is low status male attribute, is, no purpose, no identity, no boundary. So how do you feel about that? Well, you feel insecure. What meaning do you place on the fact that you have that feeling? And to do this, the easiest way is just ask, well, what does this feeling mean about me? And it can mean a lot of things. One popular thing that it means to this, maybe a younger man, let's say he's 21 years old in college, is I'm still attached to my dad. In this scenario that I'm, concocting, his dad's a lawyer, and his son, the guy from the example, is just trying to be a lawyer to make his dad happy. Okay, so what it means is I'm still attached to my dad. Why? Well, I hide from my dad. Well, why? I'm afraid of my dad's reactions. Why? I'm afraid of anger. You could keep going with that, and you connect the first why with the last. Why am I still attached to my dad? Because I'm afraid of anger. And that's my issue. I'm afraid of what his reaction may be if I talk with him about this issue, for example. Okay, so that's the meaning. Then we go to responsibility. Not responsibility for the situation, but responsibility for your feeling, for the insecurity. Of course, you're responsible for the situation. But if telling yourself that you're responsible for this situation made you truly responsible, that would have happened by now. If that doesn't work, which it usually doesn't, you got to first take responsibility for the feeling. Then whatever responsibility that you indeed have for the external situation, you will naturally take back. And the way to look at the responsibility you have for your feeling is, like I have written out there, the PCR test. You look at what your payoff is for the feeling, how you contribute to the feeling, and how you relate with anybody else if there is in fact a conflict here. So what's your payoff from being insecure? How does being insecure benefit you? Well, one potential way it could is you get to blame your dad. When things don't go well in your life, you get to blame your dad for not encouraging you. I mean, maybe he's not making you be a lawyer, but he's not really encouraging you to do anything else. And the implication in the family is that you just be a lawyer. You know, your uncle's a lawyer. You're going to work at this firm with your dad. That's the implication. You never really felt like you had much of a choice. Great. So now when things don't go well, you can blame your dad for that. Oh, it's not my problem I'm insecure, right? It's my dad, it's my upbringing. That's your payoff. It doesn't feel good necessarily, but it's familiar and it helps you to stay in the neurosis. It's comfortable, it's familiar. How do you contribute to this feeling of insecurity? Well, you're hiding from this girl, right? You're hiding the fact that you don't really have a direction in your life. That's one more vague way that you're contributing to it. And then how do you relate? Is there a conflict here? Well, yeah, there's a conflict with your dad. So how do you relate with your dad? And the way to go about doing this is just to come up with, just imagine what your dad's going through in this situation with you. And what is he going through? Well, your dad's in a situation where his son, you don't have a son, so you can't relate with that, but somebody close to him, somebody in his social circle, at the very least, is living his life. Somebody close to him is living his life to make him happy. Maybe to curry some implicit favor from him. Can you relate with that? Oh, okay, yeah. When you say it that way, boy, it reminds me of this kid on the tennis team who has no friends and is like constantly trying to like all the things I like to be my friend. And it's really annoying. Oh, geez. Now I'm thinking about it, is the fact that I'm so annoyed by that kid, is the reason why I'm so annoyed by that kid on the tennis team, is that because, it's really a reminder of who I am in relationship with my dad. Okay, good. Now, you're just relating with your dad. It's you're not equating you with him, you're just relating. What's my dad going through? And then to do. What are you able to do given all this unconscious content that we've just churned up? The facts, the feeling, the meaning, the responsibility. That responsibility. Well, what are you able to do? There's always something you're able to do, which is to get your fundamental psychological need met, which is to have your own feeling and express it in a healthy way. Express it in a way that somebody else is able to hear you. Now, you don't have to express it to any one particular person, but you need to at least express it for yourself, which is, at the very minimum, write it down. So how can you take this feeling and express it in a way where the other person is able to hear you? Let's go to your dad. What do you say to your dad? And you don't have to say this, but it's a good idea to at least write it down so you're clear about what you hide. What you're hiding, at least in this situation. You're not always hiding something. So you could say, I don't know, hey Dad, look, I'm not really sure I want to be a lawyer. I need help deciding. How did you decide to be a lawyer? Would your dad be able to hear that? Yeah, I think so. Or you could go to the girl. You go to the girl you're dating. Yeah, I'm at this tricky point in my life, and I'm not really sure, what I want to do one way or another. Now, if you can't imagine doing that and it going well, that's fine. But that just indicates you're uncomfortable with it, which indicates it's unconscious, or at least partially unconscious, or more unconscious than is safe or necessary. So why does this all matter? Well, there was that book that came out earlier this year by Abigail Shrier called Bad Therapy. And it's about how therapy can be harmful. And I discuss the book on this channel. I'll link to it in the description. I'm sure I'll remember to do that. And Abigail Shrier is right. Therapy can be dangerous. It can be harmful. Like there would be danger if you went in for a triple bypass and the surgeon couldn't distinguish between your heart and your gallbladder. We need clarity. We need clarity about these concepts we're working with. We need clarity about emotions, what your boundary is, how the former creates the latter or not. Because I want you to have both love and hate. Emotions are useful. They are the psychological equivalent of action. And if your emotions are vague, your actions are going to be vague. If you're unclear about your inner state, you're going to be unclear about your outer state. I want you to have both of those emotions in their pure, unalloyed form. Though, as I was saying before, we really only have this kind of clarity through a unification of psychology and so therapy. You need to know when you talk about having a boundary with somebody, you don't just have a boundary. You got to look at what's behind the boundary. What actually creates a boundary? What creates an identity? You need to know that the steps behind doing that, and the step is making this unconscious content that you have, rendering it conscious more and more, like we just went through in the example. That's one little brick. That's one little brick in building of the character, what Aristotle would call the character that is your dam. And I guess this also indicates, the relation between, or really the psychological basis for philosophical ideas. Paradox, it doesn't exist in philosophy. It exists in psychology, right? It exists in the neurosis in here, not the philosophy, not the reality out there. And, I guess this is true of other terms that a lot of therapists, a lot of psychologists get wrong all the time. Enmeshment. I mean, the DSM gets this wrong. I've talked about this maybe not enmeshment, but narcissism, right? Narcissism is often seen as too much self-esteem. Enmeshment is too much intimacy. Hubris is too much pride, and that's just not the case. So this is what you do. This is what you do. This is the process of emotions. This is the process of therapy. You take this unconscious content, make it conscious. You become aware of it. You put words to how you feel. In effect, you change your communication about the issue, and that is what it takes to change the issue. Thank you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please like and subscribe, my brother-in-law says. That's important to say. And I wish you all the joy and pain that comes from taking back your projections.